a young painter, a promising musician, yet he died at only 21 from a sudden brain hemorrhage. Some said it was fate, but then the rumors began. Was his death just a tragic accident, or the hidden result of a violent clash within his own band? Friends remembered him as a quiet young man, deeply devoted to painting. But the truth is, in those final years, he lived under the shadow of crippling headaches and growing tensions. Some even swore they had seen him collapse after a fight, but no one could say for certain what really happened in those days. His early death turned him into a tragic symbol of an entire generation. And the haunting question has never gone away. Was it illness, or the consequence of a secret meant to stay buried? Stay with me as we search for answers to a mystery that has never found its ending. Chapter 1. A boy who drew only sad faces, and the fate that led him to the Beatles. At the age of 10, while other children sketched castles or superheroes, he drew only sad faces. No one imagined that those pencil lines would lead him to a friendship that changed the history of music. Stuart Sutcliffe was born in 1940, while Europe was still engulfed in bombs. His father was a seaman, gone for months at a time. His mother shouldered the family burdens, while Stuart lived more in his sketchbooks and private thoughts. Friends remembered that Stuart rarely played in the streets. He often sat by a window, pale light falling across the page, where slow strokes of graphite formed deep-set eyes and contemplative mouths. One teacher once wrote, "This boy has unusual eyes, as if he sees through everything." A classmate recalled, "Sometimes we'd be talking, and Stuart would just drift away mid-sentence, as if he had slipped into another world." When the family moved to Liverpool, Stuart entered a gritty, chaotic port city. But in that unfamiliar place, he found his turning point. He was accepted into the Liverpool College of Art, where he discovered other young, rebellious spirits. And there, he met John Lennon. John and Stuart could not have been more different. Stuart was quiet, with a distant gaze. John was loud, defiant, always demanding the spotlight. Yet the contrast drew them together. A fellow student remembered, John saw Stuart as a mirror, and Stuart saw John as a flame. Their friendship quickly surpassed the ordinary. They spent nights wandering, debating art, music, and dreams no one else dared to voice. One night, John pulled Stuart into a pub and declared, "You have to join my band. We're going to make something big." Stuart laughed, saying he wasn't a musician, but John was insistent. In the end, to buy a bass guitar, Stuart sold one of his paintings, a work that would later be valued highly. But at that moment, it was simply an excuse to stay close to John. Stuart once admitted, "I only want to be near John." From painter to bass player, he stepped onto the stage, a decision that seemed impulsive but set in motion a chain of fate. His life was no longer quiet afternoons with pencil and paper, but blinding lights and pressures he was never prepared for. Did Stuart truly want to stand on stage? Or was he only trying to hold on to the bond with John Lennon? Chapter 2. From promising painter to sacrificing his future for John Lennon, a promising young painter. Yet one evening in a pub, Stuart placed his entire artistic future on the line, just to please John Lennon. John looked at Stuart with determination. "You have to join my band. We're going to make it big." Stuart knew he was not a musician, but his friendship with John was so powerful that he was willing to give up everything. To buy a bass guitar, Stuart sold one of his paintings, a work that collectors would later prize highly. But for Stuart, it was simply the cost of staying close to John. He once said, "I only want to be near John." And so Stuart stepped onto the stage with the group still known as the Quarrymen. Under dim lights, he awkwardly held a Hofner bass. George Harrison later admitted bluntly, he wasn't any good. But drummer Pete Best recalled, Stuart had presence. Audiences couldn't take their eyes off him. Stuart had the aura of an artist. Disheveled hair, dark glasses, eyes filled with sadness. He didn't need to play well. His image alone was enough. And it was that very image that made Paul McCartney feel threatened. Years later, Paul admitted, "I was jealous of Stuart. He had John in a way I never did." Tension in the band grew. Paul and Stuart clashed, often because John spent so much time with Stuart. Their bond cast a long shadow. Were they just friends? Or was there something deeper that neither of them dared to acknowledge? Those around them sensed it, but no one ever spoke it aloud. Astrid Kirchherr, who later became Stuart's lover, once hinted that their connection was beyond words, yet she never fully explained it. That ambiguity only added layers to the mystery. Even as the Beatles grew busier, Stuart continued to paint. In his diary, he confessed, "I am not a musician, I am a painter." He stood between two paths, one leading to the stage lights, the other back to the shadows of the studio. Still, Stuart left a mark. It was he who suggested the name Beatles, a wordplay on beaten Beatles. A small detail, but one that became the foundation of a legend. Yet deep down, Stuart never escaped the feeling of being out of place. He stayed in the band, more for John than for music. And it was that friendship, or perhaps a love that went unspoken, that tied him to a role he never truly wanted. Was Stuart really part of the Beatles, or only John Lennon's silent companion, forever standing at the edge of the story? Chapter 3. Friendship, Love, or a Relationship Never Admitted. Hamburg, 1960. This port city was no dream. Destination. It was a test of endurance. For Stuart Sutcliffe, it was the moment the spotlight began to consume him. Picture this. Every night, the young band had to play 6, sometimes even 8 sets. Colored lights flashing, drunken crowds shouting, cigarette smoke thick in the air. To endure, they turned to preludin, pills that kept their eyes wide open, their bodies stretched a few hours longer into wakefulness. But for Stuart, the strain was more than exhaustion. Night after night, he began to complain of blinding headaches. Once, during a break, he staggered off stage, clutching his head, and collapsed in the shadows. A friend recalled. He winced as if his skull was being crushed in a vice. And then came another story. Outside Latham Hall, during a fight, Stuart was said to have been kicked in the head. No medical record exists, and no one confirmed it. But the tale has echoed for decades. Could that blow have been the start of his relentless pain? Hamburg was also where Stuart met Astrid Kirchherr, a young photographer, different from the wild crowds of the Reeperbahn. Astrid saw in Stuart what no drunken audience ever noticed, a fragile, inward artist. Through Astrid's lens, Stuart became an icon. The black and white portraits, hair falling across his face, eyes sad and distant, gave birth to the Beatles' early image. Yet in those very photos, if you look closely, you see Stuart growing thinner, his expression more drawn. The band lived crammed together in tiny rooms, sleeping on chairs, eating whatever they could. John Lennon later said, "We were nearly exhausted, but we had to keep playing." And Stuart, never built for the stage, suffered most of all. Some believed the preludin made his condition worse. Others insisted the head injury was the true cause. Either way, his body began to send warnings. But no one, not even Stuart himself, realized those headaches would lead to his death only 2 years later. Amid those long, grueling nights, Stuart grew closer to Astrid. They found peace in each other, a quiet refuge in the chaos. But that love also forced Stuart to face a choice: remain in Hamburg with Astrid and his art, or continue with the Beatles and John Lennon. And there was something else complicating it all. John did not let go easily. People recalled moments when John grew furious at Stuart's time with Astrid. Once he shouted, "You belong to me, not to her." Was it the jealousy of a friend, or something deeper? In Hamburg, Stuart stood at the intersection of 3 pressures: a body breaking down, a love with Astrid, and a bond with John that defied explanation. Piece by piece, those pressures pushed him closer to the edge of tragedy. Was Stuart simply a victim of a punishing lifestyle? Or was he already carrying a hidden wound, the seed of the fatal end that awaited him? Chapter 4. When success came, Stuart left the Beatles to pursue art. Amid the noisy nights of Hamburg, Stuart found something beyond the music and the cigarette smoke: the gaze of Astrid Kirchherr, a young photographer, gentle yet mysterious. In Astrid's small apartment, Stuart could finally breathe and be himself. They fell in love quickly, and that love seemed to rescue Stuart from the exhaustion of the stage. Astrid took him to empty beaches, capturing black and white portraits. In her lens, Stuart appeared with his hair falling forward, dressed in dark clothes, his eyes melancholy. Those photos not only shaped the Beatles' early style, they preserved the most fragile image of him. One friend recalled, in Astrid's photos, Stuart was no longer a clumsy bass player. He was an artist, a surreal face. But that love also brought fractures. John Lennon, once closest to Stuart, grew resentful. Once, seeing Stuart spend too much time with Astrid, John erupted, "You belong to me, not to her." Was it just jealousy between friends, or a deeper confession? Stuart stood between two worlds, music and painting, John and Astrid, the stage lights, and the stillness of a room filled with the smell of oil paint. In his diary, he confessed, "I am not a musician. I am a painter." The words were simple, but heavy, proof of his choice. He was awarded a scholarship from the Hamburg College of Art, where the renowned professor Eduardo Paolozzi praised him as one of the best students I have ever taught. With Astrid by his side, it seemed Stuart had finally found his true path. And yet, if you look closely at the final photos Astrid took, you see a different Stuart. Thinner, hollow-eyed, worn down. Astrid loved him deeply, but she could not hide the truth. Stuart was fading. Some said Stuart wanted to leave the Beatles to stay in Hamburg with Astrid and his art. Others whispered the band was ready to push him out, unwilling to carry a weak bassist much longer. The truth may have been both. Stuart wanted to escape the stage, and the band was prepared to let him go. Astrid later remembered, "He wanted to paint. He wanted to be with me, but he was always torn because of John." Was her love strong enough to keep Stuart in the ordinary world? Or did it pull him away from the path that had made him famous? After his death, Astrid wrote a letter to Stuart's mother. "Today would have been the 22nd birthday of our love, but he is no longer here." That letter, simple and honest, became the final testimony of a brief but burning love. Perhaps Astrid's love was the only safe harbor Stuart ever found. But tragically, it was not enough to shield him from the pain consuming him. Did her love truly save Stuart? Or did it only carry him further from the Beatles and faster toward the tragedy that could not be avoided? Chapter 5. A headache, an injury, or a hidden truth. In early 1962, Stuart Sutcliffe began collapsing during his painting classes. One morning, as he stood at his easel, his face suddenly went pale, and he clutched his head before collapsing. Friends rushed for a doctor, but tests found nothing. Stuart was simply told to rest, but rest was no longer enough. The headaches grew worse, forcing him to leave lectures unfinished. Astrid recalled nights when Stuart cried from the pain, saying his head felt like it was about to explode. He became sensitive to light, shielding his eyes whenever he stepped outdoors. Then came April 10th, 1962. Astrid remembered that moment as a scar that would never heal. Stuart clutched his head and collapsed to the floor of their small apartment. Panicked, she rushed him into a taxi, but Stuart died on the way to the hospital. He was only 21. The official cause was recorded as a brain hemorrhage. Some doctors believed he had a congenital aneurysm, that fate had marked him long before. But the story did not end there. His sister, Pauline Sutcliffe, years later, insisted the autopsy revealed a depression in the skull. That claim shocked the Beatles world. Many quickly recalled the times Stuart had been assaulted in both Liverpool and Hamburg. Witnesses remembered him being kicked in the head outside Latham Hall. Was that blow, thought to be long past, the hidden wound that finally erupted into tragedy? Others disagreed. Doctors argued that a head injury rarely lingers silently for more than a year. They leaned toward congenital illness, worsened by the brutal Hamburg lifestyle, alcohol, pills, and exhaustion. The problem is, no full medical records were ever made public. No legal proof closed the theories. Only scattered testimonies remain. And it is this ambiguity that has kept Stuart's death a mystery for more than half a century. Astrid, the only one besides Stuart in his final days, never dwelled on the medical details. She only said simply, He died in my arms, and I lost half of my soul. And what about John Lennon? Friends said John broke down when he heard the news. He cried like a child, unable to believe the one friend, perhaps the only person he truly trusted, was gone. Some say John carried guilt for the rest of his life. Did he, in some way, believe he had played a part in Stuart's death? The story remains unresolved. Did Stuart die because of biology and fate? Or was it the result of a hidden wound, a blow never admitted? Was Stuart Sutcliffe's death an unavoidable tragedy, or the product of a truth that remains concealed to this day? Chapter 6. Death at 21. Fate or a secret never revealed. News of Stuart's death cut into the Beatles' youth like a knife. John Lennon, a man rarely open with his feelings, broke down in tears. One friend remembered, John buried his head and kept repeating, "I loved Stuart so much." These were not words John normally used, and they left many convinced that their bond went far beyond friendship. Paul McCartney reacted differently. He stayed silent, then threw himself deeper into music. Some whispered that Paul felt relief, believing no one would stand between him and John anymore. True or not, no one can say. But it was clear that the void Stuart left behind shifted the balance within the group. The Beatles exploded only a year later. In the whirlwind of success, Stuart's name nearly disappeared from the official story. And yet, he never vanished completely. Some believe the song "In My Life" that John wrote in 1965 carried Stuart's shadow, and on the cover of Sgt. Pepper's in 1967, Stuart's face appeared among dozens of others, a silent reminder that he was still there. In private moments, John still spoke of Stuart, but in public, he chose silence. Why? Was John keeping that memory for himself, or avoiding a truth no one wanted to face? Stuart's sister, Pauline, once said, "John never escaped the guilt. Stuart's death haunted him all his life." A short statement, but one that hinted at the lingering darkness. Astrid Kirchherr, too, carried Stuart's memory until her final days. She never married, and when asked, she simply said, "I didn't just photograph Stuart. I photographed his soul." Stuart, the lost Beatle, never played the great concerts, but his absence became part of the Beatles' memory. He was like a ghost that never went away. Was Stuart simply the victim of a short life, or the shadow the Beatles had to bury in order to climb to the top? Epilogue: The Lost Beatle, Memory, Legacy, and an Unanswered Question. Stuart Sutcliffe died at the age of 21. He never lived to see the Beatles conquer the world, but his presence remained in the opening chapter of their story. It was Stuart who helped give the band its name, who shaped their first image in Hamburg, and who left behind paintings that proved he was not only a musician, but a gifted artist in his own right. After his death, many exhibitions displayed Stuart's artwork. People came not just because he was the lost Beatle, but to recognize the talent of an artist whose career ended too soon. Some critics believe that had he lived, he might have become one of Britain's leading contemporary painters. Astrid Kirchherr, Stuart's great love, spent nearly her entire life preserving his memory. She never married, often saying, "I didn't just photograph Stuart. I photographed his soul." For John Lennon, silence became the truest sign of his grief. Friends recalled that John spoke of Stuart many times in private, and some believed the song "In My Life" was his tribute to the friend he lost. But Stuart's death has never been fully explained. Was it congenital brain hemorrhage, exhaustion from the punishing Hamburg lifestyle, or the lingering result of a violent blow no one dared to admit? His family once claimed there was a depression in the skull, but the autopsy results were never released in full. What is certain is that Stuart lived a short life but left a lasting mark. He stands as proof of youth's fragility, of the price of passion, and of a bitter paradox. Sometimes the one who helps begin a legend is not allowed to follow it to the end. Today, Stuart is still remembered as the lost Beatle, not because he disappeared, but because he is always there, hidden in the margins of history, a ghost in the story of the Beatles. And one final question remains unanswered. Did Stuart Sutcliffe die by fate's design, or because of a truth forever buried in silence?